the Radicle Thursdays podcast. This is our second episode and the beginning of our series of introducing a bunch of radical youth who are changing their world and their environment.
So today we have with us Jalyn Brown, and she is going to talk to us a lot about how education, there's a lot of inequality within the education system. So, Jalyn?
Hi, my name is Jalyn Brown. I'm a sophomore and I'm a political science major.
What got you interested into political science?
Honestly, I was 15 in the 2016 election, and I saw the obvious kind of divide that was starting to happen within our nation. And I really, really did not like the manner in which people were talked about during that election. I'm not going to go into like specifics, but racial and just the disabled community and just all of these different factors were being talked about during that election. And I really wanted to be a part of change in helping our nation progress. So I thought that political science was the major for me.
So you're a sophomore. So last year you were on campus and everything, I'm assuming. Okay, and then COVID hit and we were in quarantine. So can you tell us a little bit about Education Unlimited Incorporated is what it's called, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and just kind of how it started and all of that.
Okay, so quarantine hit, and I had previously, like the first day of campus, we were forced to go to this talk. And there was this woman and her name was Nadia Okamoto, and she went to Harvard and she was like 21. So she was around our age. And she started this nonprofit organization called Period. And it was legitimately about giving like women access to tampons and pads, things that they needed, homeless women. And it just became this very big nonprofit organization. That was the first day that I'd been on campus. And I started a folder in my Google Drive, and it was called Nonprofit the day after that like whole talk. And I was like, this is something that I want to do. And then school started. And I was like, okay, I'm pushing this aside. I don't need to think about this. But when quarantine hit, I realized that this was the perfect time for me to start this because I had more time on my hands than I ever had before. So Education Unlimited was a name that my co-founder, Alexander Vega, thought of, and I called up all my friends, including Allie, and I was like, hey, I have this idea. Do you want to help me? And there became Education Unlimited and our 5 other co-founders.
Right. So. And for those of you guys that don't know, Education Unlimited is just a nonprofit that focuses on education inequality within Connecticut. So what really, because there's a lot of different kinds of activism. Kenny and I focus on food activism. Education Unlimited obviously focuses on education activism. So what kind of made you choose education activism over something more like political in a different way?
Right. I think it was mainly, we all went to the same school. So I think it was mainly getting to see how we were treated in my school, my high school, and then meeting a whole lot of people who weren't treated the same way, who didn't have the same access to education, who's basically were stepping in kindergarten and being 2 steps behind where we were just because of the school that they went to. And when we're talking about low-income people and low-income communities, the main way that the United States tries to like say that you can get out of it is through education. But how are they supposed to do this if we set them up for failure the moment they step into the classroom? And I thought that that was something that I wanted to change and that a lot of my friends wanted to change. So that's why it was education.
What's the main focus of Education Unlimited?
So during COVID, we really planned on just giving people access to the internet. That was the most important thing that we wanted to do. So through petitions and like sign in contacting state representatives so that people could have access to the internet, because that is the only that's the only way that we could that students can learn during this time, but like also honestly giving schools that are underfunded materials that they need, like notebooks, pens, pencils. Eventually we planned on doing computers, but computers are really expensive, so that's not really in the budget at this point. But small things that people kind of don't really know, that people don't really think twice about, really make an impact when it comes to low income schools. So just giving kids things that are really small but are really necessary at the same point.
Awesome.
And Kenny we talked about last meeting how Kenny is actually she's studying early childhood special education. And so.
Yeah, so I am early childhood special ed major. And so one of the reasons why I personally got into it, anyone who knows me knows I absolutely love kids with my whole heart. So I want to work with them. But also I chose special ed just because like within education inequality in itself, the difference between gen ed and special ed is crazy, just with like materials and everything. So I'm focusing mainly on that, but it's very similar to how you're focusing on just school districts in general. So that's really, really amazing. How do you plan? So you're a political science. Do you foresee there being a way of you like eventually evolving Education Unlimited to kind of like work with your political science major?
Um, yeah, honestly, I plan on becoming a lawyer, so I'm on the pre-law track. So I feel like a nonprofit organization could eventually evolve into something bigger with like the need for like legal assistance. So, I mean, I do want this to become a bigger organization. I want it to get its feet off the ground because honestly, that's really hard to do, especially right now. But I see it working really well with my future degrees.
So cool. That's so cool.
So you touched on how it's hard getting things off the ground now. You, like you mentioned, just started this nonprofit during quarantine from having extra time on your hands. What were some of the hesitations you had going into creating this nonprofit, and how were you able to overcome it, and what's some advice you would give to younger people to get to the place where they can just get the balls running? Or is that the term?
Ball rolling.
Ball rolling? Yeah.
Yeah. Honestly, the biggest hesitation was like, is anyone going to care about this? It's not something that's really talked about, especially in Connecticut, because Connecticut is currently ranked either fourth or third best nations for education right now. But we are also ranked number one for the biggest opportunity gap. So that's honestly, when we talk about Connecticut's education system, it's typically a good thing. We're talking about how great we are at education. Bringing up that we aren't so great in some aspects is daunting because, not everyone's going to agree with me. And there are statistics that legitimately say that Connecticut's really good. So I was scared that people wouldn't really understand or people wouldn't care about what I was talking about. I think as a young person, though, you have to take a chance, right? You are young enough to be honest, like if this didn't work out, I could have just started over and done something different. Like take that chance, take that leap. You definitely have the ability. And I think that people do care, honestly. And I found a lot more supporters than I thought possible. So I think that's something.
Ironically enough, or maybe not ironically enough, Kenny and I, junior year of high school, we were enrolled in this class called AP Seminar. It's legitimately just a class on research. Don't eye roll. That was a good class. We cried a lot, but it was a good class. And one of our papers was actually on education inequality. And I looked a lot more at how income can affect education, like you said. And yeah, a lot of people don't want to talk about the fact that education, specifically in Connecticut, there are huge gaps. We are typically known as a pretty wealthy state, but in doing that, we kind of diminish the voices that maybe aren't as wealthy as the average income. And I think we forget that education inequality is a real issue, and we don't want to talk about it or admit it. And along with that, when you don't have, I mean, we talked about this a lot in our meetings past like 2 years or so from the ground up about, specifically in DC, when we went on our DC trip, we learned about this, that people in lower income neighborhoods oftentimes have to rely on SNAP benefits to make up for income that they don't have to buy nutritional needs. And a lot of times people in low income neighborhoods also happen to live in food deserts. And it seems simple, the concept of it just makes sense, but when you're not getting enough nutrients in your body, you're not able to perform as well on tests that ultimately impact your school's funding, which is crazy. It doesn't seem right. I mean, you would think that if you didn't do well on a test, you should be able to get more funding so you can, get more resources and do better. But that's not the case. Unfortunately, the better you do, the more funding you get. And we've seen it in Granby, Connecticut, despite the fact that we are known as a really good education system. We don't have a school breakfast program because of where we live, and it's fine. But on days of test days, so I don't know, we haven't been in a position where we've had to take school tests for a while.
Like CMT stuff.
CMTs, right?
Yeah.
We would give kids breakfast before they take it, and it's because it boosts your ability to perform and to concentrate. And that's how, activism and problems, they all intersect. It's crazy what they intersect. So.
Yeah, that one, I forget when it came up in one of our meetings. I think this was junior year, and Alicia was telling us about how right before CMTs or before standardized testing, those were the only days throughout the whole school year that the school would provide breakfast to the kids. And when I heard that, that just blew my mind, that it truly shows, and it's nothing against our town or our district, because this is a nationwide thing, and just I don't know, it goes beyond just our town for sure. But just the fact that test scores are put above the well-being of their kids on the day-to-day basis, and suddenly the kids' nutrition only matters when it does play into funding and play into your standing as a school, is very shocking, and I think extremely sad. But yeah, that was one fact that really blew my mind, that's true. That's one of those things that you wish it isn't true, but it probably is for your town as well. It's true for everywhere. Yeah, while we were in DC, we met with DC Kitchen and just talked about the poverty in DC and the inequalities there. So have you noticed in your research of starting Education Unlimited any other forms or any other barriers kind of impacting the lives that you're trying to reach beyond just education?
Right. Yeah, there are lots of barriers impacting the lives that I'm talking about. We're talking about, well, when I speak of typical education inequality, it happens to be in low-income areas. So low-income areas have a whole lot of issues that affect the students. So we talk about poverty, racial education inequality is actually a big thing that I had never really looked into until starting this. There is, yeah, as you talked about, food inequality and housing instability that a lot of these children are just going through while they're also being impacted by the educational differences. And it's a lot. It's honestly unfair.
Yeah, I mean, even like housing, like we're so blessed that we don't have to think about that. But like, there are 5 year olds who are trying to like just start their education. They know nothing about the world and they're having to move from like house to house, from place to place, which is just crazy. One thing that you said that was very interesting, which I have always thought about, not always, recently thought about, is racial. Um, so we grew up in
Predominantly white town.
I think it's 98% white, if I
Yeah.
maybe 96, like high, predominantly white town. And all three of us are not white.
Minorities.
Bella's half white, but we're like minorities. So I know personally for me, and this has been one thing that I've really, I have a goal of while I'm in college and away from my town, is to really, okay, I'll start with this. So right before I went to school, my mom and I were talking, and my mom said for her, she wanted, or for a lot of people, they want to start meeting people that aren't like them in college, and you start learning about different cultures. But for me and for like what my mom went through and everything, I want to start meeting people who are like me and who have like who are Black and who have these different aspects, because I, growing up in a predominantly white town, have predominantly white friends. And so I never honestly really thought of my race as, I don't know, like I never really thought about it when I was hanging out with my friends or anything. Um, but even like looking again at inequality, like between, like with race, I mean, race plays a role in everything, obviously, and especially in today's culture, it most definitely has. Um, but with education, like the separation between students and having how like towns like ours will bus kids in it, because the fact that these inner city students are not receiving the same quality of education because of a variety of factors as well as racial. And then when they come here to predominantly white towns, they are receiving education that is Eurocentric and is not even reflecting what they see growing up, which I think plays a very big role in like students' identity and trying to figure out who they are as a person.
Yeah, I can definitely attest to that. It's definitely one thing I'd like to point out, and I don't want to have like put our town on blast or anything, but racial discrepancies when it comes to education definitely still occurs in a town such as ours. I recently was doing a project and I looked up our town. It was about education inequality. And the Black students in our town are 5.4 times less likely to take an AP class. The Black students
All
in our
right.
town are 16.8 times more likely to be suspended from school. Now, if you would look at the dynamics of our town, there aren't that many Black students in our town. So the fact that, the minority population is being suspended 16.8 times more than the majority white population, that's an issue. And the fact that um, even though most of the Black students in our town started with us in kindergarten, they are 5.4 times less likely to take an AP class. That's an issue. And that has to do with the way that the school functions, the way that teachers deal with these students, and the education that they receive, as you said, Kenya, the Eurocentric education that they receive. And I think that, that's something that most majority white towns need to talk about, the way that they treat their minority students.
Yeah, one thing that I remember, and actually this happened to, so I have three siblings, not four, I have three siblings, there's four of us, and none of us ever talked about this until maybe like 3 years ago, until we realized we all had the same exact thing. And one thing that I specifically remember all of us do is the end of the school day, like first day of school, and we moved 4 times in Granby. So I had just a different bus, so I didn't know what my bus was. And every time I would like start a new school, I would be lost, like where's my bus? And the bus drivers, so sometimes the staff at the school, but even the bus drivers themselves would say, oh, the Hartford bus is over there. And I was like, oh no, like I live literally right up the street. And they look at me and they're like, oh. And it's just so interesting how the, I guess just like idea that all minority students have to live in like have to be bussed in is very interesting. And that just shows that it isn't just within our school, it's just everyone. It's just the culture that we live in, which is very sad, but yeah.
Right. Yeah, I've definitely had that experience too. So
Yeah. Okay, well, go ahead.
It's interesting that you bring up how minorities tend to not gravitate towards honors and or AP classes, because actually right when quarantine hit and Kenny and I had a little more free time on our hands, whether or not we had schoolwork, not the point. And we were thinking about it because at that point we had begun talking about and having these race discussions because of the whole increase in Black Lives Matter movement and how it's affected Grammy in particular, and how no one really wanted to talk about it and was kind of diminishing minority voices, which was a whole nother issue. But one day we sat down and we're like, wait a minute, how can people say to strive for whatever you want? You're in a good education system. You can do whatever you want. And these guidance counselors are telling you this. You can become anything. But there are the percentage of across the school, and we went and we calculated this, of teachers in positions that were minorities was less than 5%. And that was across the district. Within the school systems, a lot of the people that were in minorities happened to be janitors. So they weren't even teachers. So how can you tell kids to strive and go for their dreams when you don't even have a person in a position to show them that it's possible? We don't have, a representation of people of color in teaching positions at all, and even less in AP classes and honor classes. So it's just crazy because we talk about like underlying racial inequality and how it is shown in education, and this is a big thing. And Kenya's mom was telling us about people of color and their interpretation of Granby and their hesitation towards wanting to teach in Granby. And
we were like having a whole discussion, and my mom, like, she had some family friends who were interested in moving to Granby, and my mom was like, oh, it's a great school system, like very nice people, blah, 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 blah. And we've lived here now, if I'm 18, we've lived here for 16 years. So, and my dad is the biggest Granby fan you can ever imagine. So like my parents love the town. And so my mom was telling this family about it, and they were like, oh, I don't really know. And mom was like, well, why would you say that? Like, why do you have that perception of Granby? And it's very interesting, I think, because we've grown up in the town. But when people, especially minorities, look in on Granby, they see that it's a predominantly white town. And it's so interesting how that one fact about a whole place can completely change everything. So I think it's really circling back to Education Unlimited. I think it's really cool how you are really just honing in on those groups who maybe feel like
they're not welcomed, or
like
they're not seen
in the education system throughout our nation and like in our town. And just like education is like, you need education to live. You really do. And the fact that some people are denied that because of simple, small, minuscule things, no matter what it is really sad. applaud you on doing that. And yeah, I think it's really inspirational.
Most definitely.
So looking towards the future, what do you plan Education Unlimited going? Where?
Honestly, my friend, not even she is my friend, but a co-founder, has a lot of ties to Hartford Public Schools. My mother has some ties to Bloomfield Public Schools, and they are like well known as areas that need a lot of attention right now because of just the way the level of education that their students are getting is not up to par at this point. And I think that's where we're going to head. Trying to work within those types of schools and help those types of students. But also I could be working within Granby as well. Miss Patton, as you know, she reached out a little while ago. So they have a
task force.
Yes. And so maybe I'll work with them as well. But it's just really working within schools, working in tandem with educators, and trying to do the things that need to be done.
Now, let me ask you this. Having talked about how you want to go into law, and that's something you're really interested in, as well as education and education equality, is there anything that can be done legislation-wise to combat this issue?
Yeah, there are a whole lot of things that can be done, but a lot of people will not like the answers that I'm going to give. So I say this as in this is something that can be done, but it's not necessarily something that has to be done. Maybe there are other forms, but to be completely honest, I think right now the only way to combat education inequality completely is to end, I don't know how to say this in a nice way.
Just say it. We're not
Just
nice.
Say it. Just say it.
We already gave the disclaimer that we weren't dissing necessarily everybody, but this is just to be frank.
Yeah, so Connecticut, the reason that we have education inequality is because education is funded by our taxes. So people who live in higher income areas obviously are going to pay more taxes towards their overall community. This means that lower income people are going to have low funded schools by default. In order to stop this, I think taxes need to go directly to the state level and then can be distributed evenly throughout the school systems. I think that people might say, okay, that's like a socialistic property, but in all honesty, it's within our state, and no kid deserves to have free public education that is less than what is the average. It doesn't make sense. If it's free public school education,
it should be all the same.
At least equal level.
Be a disparity.
Right. There can be small disparities. Obviously, things are going to differ based on home life and all these other factors that are affecting them, but there should be no ginormous gaps. And we have ginormous gaps right now. And we have a very big difference within funding.
You know what? I actually never really thought about that. That sounds so bad. I never thought about just taking it to the state level and our taxes and just, distributing it equally. But it makes sense to do that. And like you said, it may sound crazy to people because people are greedy, like we talked in our last podcast. But honestly, share the wealth. If we want to be known as one of the best places to get an education, we have to show that we can do it across the board. And the only way we can do that is by giving almost as equally as possible the same education. And in order to do that, you need funding.
Right.
And if you're going to say, I want the argument to eventually be that the disparity is between private schools and public schools, not within public schools. There shouldn't be, that just doesn't make sense.
Exactly. It doesn't make any sense. And the other way that you can do it is by making entirely new schools that are in between districts, and everyone will just be bussed in to a school, except for the people that are the closest to that town, I guess. But that was another thing that was brought up in one of my political science courses, that we could all just have general schools in between districts. But I think that would cost a lot more money just because you'd have to build schools. So
Yeah.
I think the option one is probably
with the taxes. Well, with the taxes, I like don't know how taxes work, which I probably should, seeing as I pay them.
That's another thing wrong with the education system. We aren't taught about anything in terms of income. Screwing us over.
It, like, when you say it, like, it's kind of like, duh. Like, I don't understand, like, the fact that, I mean, okay, sure, there might be more in-depth to it, but at the basis, like, at the most basic level, I don't really see the reasoning as to why it hasn't been done yet. And I think, like Bella said, it is just greediness, and it's just really sad. But
the biggest issue that people have with it is that it's automatically going to lower the value of your home because of the fact that school directly impacts the value of your home. The reason that people are allowed in Granby to like price homes that aren't really that nice at like $400,000 is because we have a good education system. So as soon as you make education even throughout, homes decrease in value automatically.
That's interesting. I thought it would make sense if they increased in value if the education was brought up to par. But perhaps that would turn people away. But at the same time, people say that people are leaving Connecticut all the time, but you know what? I see in Granby living almost every day people saying, just moved here, what's the best pizza? I'm like, please.
What's the best pizza?
That was literally a post the other day. I was like
2 days ago.
Girl, there is no good pizza. I don't know what to tell you.
I remember that post. Okay, well, thank you so much, Jalyn. Our quote for today is by Malcolm Forbes, the entrepreneur who started the Forbes magazine and everything. And it is, "The purpose of education is to replace an empty mind with an open one." I really like this quote because I know that when I was younger, and it's starting to change, especially now that I'm training to become an educator, but I always felt like I was being just taught, like I did not see the purpose behind the education. Like, these are just the facts that you need to know, and I didn't really like that. But when you have teachers like our dear English teacher, who
Linda, shout out to you.
Love her. When you have educators like that one and others that really don't just teach just for you to learn information, but to really make you think in a different way, is much more impactful for sure than just here's the history facts, here's the science facts. So, yeah. Any final thoughts, anyone?
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
And lastly, if you want to support us and our nonprofit, Nourish My Soul, you can go to our Instagram or Facebook, as well as the From the Ground Up Instagram, or our website, which is nourishmysoul.org. And donate or hit the like, give us a suggestion. Really anything helps. And you can support Education Unlimited by
going to our Instagram page, Education Unlimited Inc. at Education Unlimited Inc. And we have a GoFundMe link there. Also, we're working on a website, so stay in touch.
To come.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jalyn.
Thank you. Okay, alrighty, folks. It's been
That's all.
A blast. Have a lovely day and change the world.
Yeah.
Go get him, Tiger.